So with the Pike Syndicate starting to show up in the Book of Boba Fett, it brought up some topics relating to spice mining. So I figured today we could take a look at the spice mines maintained by organizations like the Pike Syndicate, and specifically the planet of Kessel, where a lot of that mining took place. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So the lore behind Kessel and the spice mines on that planet are about as old as Star Wars itself. One of the first lines in A New Hope is C-3PO being worried that him and R2 are going to be sent to the spice mines of Kessel. But today we're going to explore exactly what the spice mines of Kessel were and who owned them. So for those of you who don't know, Kessel is a planet that is famed for its spice mines, generally used often as a labor colony or prison camp. It served to mine a lot of raw resources, but one of the most notable ones was spice, which was a controlled substance that operates sort of like drugs within the Star Wars universe. It's traded frequently by large crime syndicates, but most notably by the Pike Syndicate, which often deals in spice. And to maintain the spice trade that basically propped up the Pike Syndicate, they spent centuries shipping slave labor off to Kessel. Now, we don't know exactly when the spice mining on Kessel began. It was likely long before the Star Wars stories that we've heard. It sounds like it's become sort of a well-known feature within Star Wars society. Most people seem to know that Kessel is where the spice mines are, and they're not a pleasant place to be. But we know for at least the stretch of the timeline that we've seen in the movies that Kessel was operated by several factions to carry out mining operations. The first and most notable is the one I've mentioned several times already, the Pike Syndicate. We know the Pike Syndicate operated several mines on Kessel, and we got to see one of these mines during the events of Solo. And, well, it's not entirely clear whether this mine was actually dedicated to mining coaxium or mainly intended to mine spice. If it wasn't intended to mine spice, there definitely were similar Pike Syndicate mines across Kessel actually focused on mining spice, their main trade. But this does, by the way, show that Kessel did have mines that were able to drudge up other things like coaxium, which is valuable hyperdrive fuel, but the Pike Syndicate wasn't the only faction to operate mines on Kessel. Notably, the Empire did so as well. We see in the first season of Rebels them liberate a bunch of Wookiee slaves from a spice mine on Kessel being operated by the Empire. It seems like, at least during the reign of the Empire, both the Pikes and the Imperials had significant presence on the world, and a lot of them were using similar labor forces. It does appear that both factions used a lot of slave labor in the mining of spice. After all, it sounds like this process of drudging up this valuable resource was not very pleasant for those that took part, so it would have been hard to find willing participants in this mining operation. As such, both factions made use of slave labor to get the job done. I think it's also worth noting that a lot of these slaves were Wookiees, probably brought there due to their physical strength and abilities. So, during the reign of the Empire, Kessel was maintained by both the Pike Syndicate and the Imperials, but what about during the rest of galactic history? Well, I think it's safe to say that during the time before the rise of the Empire, the Republic was likely not involved in slave-fueled mining operations. Instead, it's probably safe to assume that the operation on Kessel before the rise of the Empire was likely carried out entirely by the Pike Syndicate and maybe one or two of the other major crime syndicates around the galaxy. Syndicates like the Hutts or the Black Sun. And it was likely much of the same after the fall of the Empire. As I discussed in a video last week, the New Republic really didn't have that much control over its territory, and probably had bigger fish to fry than the Pike Syndicate mines on Kessel, so I think it's a safe bet that with the fall of the Empire, the Pike Syndicate likely took over old Imperial facilities and continued running them themselves, maybe even all the way up to the days of the First Order. And I think that theory is lended credence by the fact that we do see Pike Syndicate officials transporting spice in the Book of Boba Fett. Now, while we don't know for sure that that spice came from Kessel and the slave labor-fueled mines there, I wouldn't think it to be impossible, especially since clearly the Pike Syndicate is still in an operating state. The New Republic hasn't quite cracked down on them, at least not yet. But one of the factions I've mentioned a lot here is the Pike Syndicate, who controlled many of the different mining facilities across Kessel for much of galactic history. If you'd like to learn more about the Pike Syndicate and the role they play within the greater Star Wars galaxy, I'll leave a link up here to a video on that. And I want you to let me know down in the comments whether you think there are other factions that are also operating on Kessel. Do you think Black Sun or Crimson Dawn have facilities there as well? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.